Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are from Group 4 English for Debate 109. Today, we would like to perform our debate with the motion is this House believes that English should be the language of education in developing countries. The first speaker of affirmative team to open the debate first, Kosmas, the time is yours.
Thank you, Tania, for the time. So there is learning crisis that is affecting the developing world, and this crisis and has three distinct dimensions. If you look at what are the actual problems of the learning crisis, and this is really across the developing world. A lot of kids are getting into school, but there are still a problem of number of very marginalized groups who are not, and so they're not getting opportunities to learn. And this by large kids who live in conflict countries. Half of the kids who are out of school in the world today live in countries affected by armed conflict and war and violence. And these are kids who are rural, who are very poor, oftentimes are girls. So while many children are in school, the education they're getting is subpar. And this is especially evident in their reading skills. Hundreds of millions of kids in school in the developing world today, about estimates are that there's about 200 million children who are really struggling to even learn the most foundational skill of kids who are at grade 7. So they finish primary school they're in. You know, lower secondary school can barely read it. Grade 2 level, almost a quarter of kids in Uganda at grade 7 can barely read. A grade 2, look, this goes around the continent of Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. So kids are not learning foundational skills. And then the third dimension is that many of these children are not getting education that will prepare them for the jobs of today and tomorrow. The third dimension of the learning crisis is really for those kids who actually ended up being able to master foundational skills progress on higher education, such as secondary school. They're not learning these relevant skills they need for their own, and also for job opportunities. They're being trained and in what really is an old way of doing education that was more suited to a colonial era. That trains government bureaucrats, few of them, and in fact, that's not where the job growth is. The job growth is in private sector enterprise, and you need critical thinking, teamwork, all sorts of transferable skills that they are not acquiring. And what about education? Educating course in the developing world is there a barrier to this in some countries. So there's very high demand for education. It's just that there's a range of resource on family, and girls get the last row. For example, if families who are very poor, one coping mechanism that they have is to marry their girls off. That gives them a little bit more resource that frees up some burdens, that strategy that many families who are just desperately poor. And it's frankly less for lack of interest, I think, oftentimes of families to overall their children in education and more just a range of coping mechanisms that leaves girls at the bottom. Developing countries face a huge number of challenges, one of which you may expect, and we hear a lot about, which is resources. There are some developing countries who don't spend nearly enough on education as they should, who spend a great deal more on their things like the military and security and rest of other sectors. And you know, there's no hard and fast rule, but we do see that if a country puts around 4% if of its GDP towards education, that those are the countries that are quite successful, and so that's an important term. Is it so imperative that the next generation who's going to be the future leaders of these countries gets a really solid base in good literacy, numeracy, critical thinking, and life and labor skills? Because of that, really is long-term sustainable path out of poverty and destitution for these countries. We certainly extravert the political conflicts that go on so. There's a lot of good evidence to show that folks in the developing world, the more educated those populations are, the greater demand they have for American, for example. If you want to use the US as the example, American goods and services, more people buy iPods. So it's actually it's directly helpful for our own economy. It's also very helpful to try to tackle some of the global challenges that we need everybody in the world to tackle, and that includes preventing disease that flow across borders, that includes protecting our environment, which knows no sort of artificial borders that we have on our maps. And it also includes things like security, things like violent extremism have been shown to be harder to take root in countries where there's a great deal of opportunity education. What countries need to do is take this idea of learning as the end goal rather than access as the end goal, which is a lot of countries have been doing seriously and change the way they use their resource, and they invest in early childhood in gaining sort of foundational literacy, numeracy skills, and transitioning into relevant skills, secondary education with relevant curriculum. Those things just with existing resources will make a big difference. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kosmas. Then we move to the first speaker of opposition team, me, Tania, as the first speaker of opposition team. As the first speaker from opposite team, I disagree with the definition of affirmative team that English should be the language of education in developing countries. So we, the opposite team, believe that this statement is false, because in Indonesia, which is a developing country, English can only be used as the language of instruction in schools for certain subjects. However, as the main language of instruction, schools are still required to use Indonesian. I think the use of English as the language of instruction should only be used for lessons that are not related to the cultivation of national character. As for lessons related to the cultivation of national character, Indonesian language must be used. This is because the current polemic of using English and Indonesian is still caused by by unclear regulations. Therefore, the Minister of Education and Culture needs to tighten and clarify the rules for using the language of instruction in schools. As is known, parents and education activists test Article 5, Paragraph 3 of the National Education System Law to the Constitutional Court. They are Andi Akbar Fitriadi, Nadia Masikuria, Milang Tauhida as parents of students, Juwono Ludewig Pat, Bambang Wisudo, Febri Antoni Arif as education activists. They considered that the article governing the implementation of international standard education units was discriminatory. The existence of this article gives rise to the different treatment practices between public schools and RSPI or SPI. For example, in public schools, the facilities are minimal and the teachers are not qualified. Meanwhile, in RSPI schools, the facilities are complete and the teachers are qualified. RSPI also uses English as an introduction. The use of English as the language of instruction is also considered to violate the Constitution. The use of foreign language in Indonesia is regulated in Article 29, Paragraph 2 of Law Number 24, 2009, concerning the national flag, language and emblem, and national anthem. The article states that foreign language can be used as the language of instruction in educational units for the purpose of supporting students' foreign language skills. As said by linguist Abdul Khair, the use of English in the teaching and learning process at RSPI is contrary to the constitutional mandate stated in Article 36 of the 1945 Constitution and Article 29, paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 of Law Number 24, 2009. Thank you. So we move to the second speaker of affirmative team. Akmal, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you for the time. I'm Akmal as a second speaker from affirmative team. Still agree with the motion. This House believes that English should be the language of education in developing countries, because English is the most important language in the world. For students in the world of education, English is needed in order to be able to study knowledge around the world and provide great opportunities to be able to compete in the international world and be useful for the nation. So it can be said that English has a very important position and role for the development of an education in an effort to advance the nation's education, which can also improve the quality of education in order to have generation that excels both in academic and non-academic fields. Not only that, by improving English language learning, education in the country is able to produce a generation that is proficient and has language skills. Seeing these developing countries have the potential to be able to compete internationally in the future, generations are needed who are able to introduce these countries to foreign countries with the language of international communication, making English the language of education for developing countries will greatly help improve their language skills for their nations, capacity to participate at the global level. Thus, English opens up opportunities for developing countries to take part concretely at the international level. For example, presenting their research findings at international conferences, participating in science Olympiads at the international level, publishing their articles in international journals, and also being able to collaborate with others foreigner cooperation where the documents are written and legalized in English. Seeing the concrete example above, there is no doubt that learning English is very important to do from an early age. From the explanation above, it can be concluded that English will not affect or shift the development of their language, which is the national language of their nation. The underlying reasons are that English has the status of a foreigner language in developing countries. Both English learning only occurs in formal classroom learning or around the world of education. Thus, it has become imperative for developing countries to continue to learn English from an early age, because early language learning provides many positive benefits for these developing countries. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Akmal. Then we move to the second speaker, opposition. Fiona, the time is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Fiona as a second speaker of opposition team, and I would like to refute the arguments from the affirmative team. The affirmative team said that English should be the language of education in developing countries. We strongly disagree with that because children automatically will use English more often than their national language. They will be more accustomed to speaking in English. This is very dangerous because they can forget their mother tongue. English shouldn't be required in the world of education, especially in elementary schools. The most appropriate solution is to make English as an option. For example, holding an English extracurricular. This way will be more efficient because students will get their national language learning with a longer duration than foreign language. The extracurricular will be held outside the class hours. For example, in Indonesia, head of the Ministry of Education and Culture's Language Development and Development Agency, Professor Dr. Masun said that Indonesian is not only a means of communication, but also national identity. So it is better to teach Indonesian language first. Nevertheless, a country can develop not by making English the primary language, but by promoting national culture and establishing an identity in the international community. If they want to learn English, they can do through informal education, which is commonly accessible for free on the internet, such as YouTube, Instagram, Google, etc. As a result, the mandatory language change in formal educational institutions is not a must-do given the abundance of other options. To sum up everything that has been started so far, English is not required to be the primary language of education because there are many other ways to learn English outside the schools, and the primary focus on developing countries is to promote national identity through speaking and mastering the mother tongue. Students should be given the freedom so that they can choose whether they want to learn English or not. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Then we move to the third speaker of opposite team. ILMI, the time is yours.
The teaching of English as a foreign language has always been considered very important in Indonesia to be able to compete with other countries in terms of science, commerce, and technologies. But in real practice, the government does not seem to show seriousness in the matter. Let us look at the curriculum and syllabus. In a way, the content of the English syllabus is very dense. It covers all the language skills and components. But the result of the teaching-learning process is still not satisfactory. When we look at the teaching-learning process that has been done in public schools, we can probably say that the unsatisfactory result was caused by some factors. First of all, language teaching is different from other subject teaching. Language teaching is not just a matter of teaching the knowledge, it is more of teaching the skills. It takes a long time to train someone to become fluent in using the language skills. In reality, the class size is usually big while allotted time for English subjects is very little and the meeting frequency is very low. Meanwhile, a foreign language must be taught intensively in small classes with high frequency of meetings. And we understand that the use of English has more benefits in the current era of globalization, especially for developing countries. However, I assure you that the progress of country is not determined by a foreign language or English. For example, until now in Japan, less than 5% of its citizens can speak English. So, language is not determinant of progress. The determinant of progress is the appreciation of scientific reasoning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ilmi. So that's all from our group. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.